3 weeks had passed since Miss Collins arrived at the school, and Tommy's world had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. Every day after regular classes, he stayed to work on art projects while Miss Collins prepared her lessons. Their afternoon sessions had become the highlight of his day. The relationship between teacher and student had grown into something deeper, a genuine mentorship and friendship. Miss Collins had introduced Tommy to watercolors, pastels, and charcoal techniques. His drawings were becoming more sophisticated, and he was developing his own artistic style that blended realistic detail with expressive emotion. More importantly, Tommy was changing as a person. He spoke up more in class, participated in discussions, and even made a few friends among his classmates who had noticed his artwork displayed on the classroom bulletin board. Miss Collins had asked his permission to show his drawings to the other students, and their positive reactions had boosted his confidence tremendously. On this particular Friday afternoon, Tommy was working on an ambitious project, a large drawing that showed different scenes from ranch life arranged like panels in a comic strip. Miss Collins sat nearby, grading papers, but occasionally looking up to offer encouragement or suggestions. "Your composition skills have really improved," she said, studying his work. "The way you've arranged these different scenes creates a wonderful narrative flow. It's like you're telling the story of a day in the life of a ranch." Tommy smiled at the praise, but then his expression grew more serious. "Miss Collins, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Tommy. What's on your mind? Why are you so different from other teachers? I mean, why do you care so much about helping me with my art? You don't have to do this." Miss Collins set down her papers and gave Tommy her full attention. It was a question she had been expecting, but it still touched her deeply. "That's a very thoughtful question," she said. "The truth is, when I was growing up, I had a teacher who changed my life. I was a shy, awkward girl who loved to paint, but I didn't think I was any good at it. My teacher, Mr. Henderson, saw something in my work that I couldn't see myself. He stayed after school with me, taught me techniques, and, most importantly, he believed in me." Tommy listened intently as Miss Collins continued. "Without his encouragement, I never would have pursued art in college, and I probably never would have become a teacher myself. He showed me that sometimes all a person needs is one adult who believes in them and takes the time to help them grow." "Is that why you became a teacher?" Tommy asked. "Partly, yes. I wanted to be for other students what Mr. Henderson was for me. When I see talent like yours, Tommy, I can't just ignore it. You have a real gift, and with the right guidance and practice, you could go far with your art." Tommy felt his cheeks warm with pride, but also with something deeper, a sense of being truly valued and understood. "My dad says I have a gift too, but he doesn't really know how to help me with it," Tommy said. "He's good at ranch work and fixing things, but art is different." "Your father loves you and supports you," Miss Collins said. "That's the most important thing. Not every parent knows how to nurture every talent their child has, but that doesn't make their love any less real." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. Both Tommy and Miss Collins looked up in surprise as Jake Martinez appeared in the doorway of the classroom. He was still wearing his work clothes, and his face was flushed from rushing. "Tommy, what are you still doing here? I went by the house, and you weren't there. I was worried something had happened." Tommy's heart sank. In all the weeks he'd been staying after school, his father had never come looking for him. Jake usually worked until well after dark, and never expected Tommy to be home this early. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have left you a note. Miss Collins has been helping me with my art after school." Jake's eyes moved from his son to the young teacher, taking in the art supplies scattered across Tommy's desk and the drawings tacked to the bulletin board. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Martinez," Miss Collins said, standing up and extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Collins, Tommy's teacher. It's nice to finally meet you." Jake shook her hand politely, but remained guarded. "Miss Collins, Tommy's mentioned you." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Tommy could sense tension between the two adults, though he wasn't sure what was causing it. "Tommy has been staying after school to work on art projects," Miss Collins explained. "I hope that's all right. He has remarkable talent, and I've been trying to help him develop his skills." Jake looked at the drawing Tommy had been working on, studying the detailed scenes of ranch life. Despite his gruff exterior, Tommy could see a flicker of pride in his father's eyes. His mother was artistic too, Jake said quietly. She always said he got that from her side of the family. Tommy told me about his mother, Miss Collins said gently. She obviously did a wonderful job teaching him to observe the world around him. His drawings show incredible attention to detail and real emotional depth. Jake nodded but didn't respond immediately. Tommy could tell his father was struggling with something, though he wasn't sure what. I appreciate what you're doing for him, Jake finally said. But I need to know when he's going to be late getting home. Ranch work starts early, and I need to know where my son is. Of course, Miss Collins said. I should have sent a note home with Tommy explaining our arrangement. From now on, I'll make sure you know when he's staying after school. Tommy looked back and forth between his father and his teacher, sensing undercurrents in their conversation that he didn't fully understand. There was something in his father's demeanor that seemed protective, almost defensive. Dad, Miss Collins has been really helping me, Tommy said. She's taught me so much about different art techniques, and she thinks I could maybe even take classes at the community college someday. Jake's jaw tightened slightly. College classes? Tommy, you're 12 years old, and we have responsibilities on the ranch. The words came out harsher than Jake had intended, and Tommy visibly flinched. Miss Collins stepped forward diplomatically. Mr. Martinez, I wasn't suggesting anything immediate. I just think Tommy has exceptional talent that deserves to be nurtured. There's no rush. I just want him to know that he has options for his future. His future is on the ranch, Jake said firmly. It's been our family's way of life for 3 generations. Tommy knows that. The classroom fell silent again. Tommy felt caught between two worlds, the comfortable, encouraging environment Miss Collins had created for him, and the practical, traditional expectations of his father. For the first time, he realized that his growing attachment to his teacher and to art might be creating a conflict he hadn't anticipated. Miss Collins seemed to sense the delicate nature of the situation. Mr. Martinez, I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for ranch life and the values it teaches. Tommy often talks about the work you do and how much he admires you. I'm not trying to pull him away from his family or his heritage. I just want to help him explore all of his talents. Jake studied the young teacher's face, trying to determine her motives. He had spent years protecting Tommy from disappointment and loss, and his protective instincts were on high alert. This teacher, with her talk of college and artistic careers, represented possibilities that felt both exciting and threatening. Miss Collins, Jake said carefully, I'm sure you mean well. But, Tommy and I have a life that works for us. We don't need complications. Tommy felt his stomach drop. He could hear the finality in his father's voice, and he was terrified that this magical time with Miss Collins was about to end. Dad, please, Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Collins isn't trying to complicate anything. She's just helping me get better at something I love. Jake looked at his son and saw something he hadn't seen in years, genuine passion and enthusiasm. It reminded him painfully of how Tommy's mother used to look when she talked about her own artistic dreams. Miss Collins watched the exchange between father and son with growing understanding. This wasn't really about her or about art classes. This was about a father who was afraid of losing his son to a world he didn't understand, and a boy who was torn between loyalty to his family and excitement about his newly discovered potential. Mr. Martinez, Miss Collins said softly, maybe we could find a compromise. What if Tommy just continued working on his art here after school, with your permission? No pressure about college or formal classes, just a chance for him to keep developing his talent in a supportive environment. Jake was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with conflicting emotions. He loved his son deeply and wanted him to be happy, but he also felt responsible for preserving their family's way of life and keeping Tommy grounded in reality. Finally, Jake spoke. Tommy, go pack up your things. We need to head home. Tommy's heart sank as he began gathering his art supplies. He carefully placed his drawings in his folder, wondering if this was the last time he would work on them with Miss Collins. As Tommy packed, Jake stepped closer to Miss Collins and spoke in a low voice that his son couldn't hear. Miss Collins, I'm not trying to be unreasonable, but Tommy's been through enough loss in his life. I can't have him getting attached to things that might not last. Miss Collins met Jake's eyes steadily. Mr. Martinez, I understand your concern. But isn't it also a loss for Tommy if he doesn't get the chance to explore his talents? I'm not going anywhere. I have a contract for the rest of the school year, and I plan to stay in this community. Tommy won't lose me the way he lost his mother. The mention of Tommy's mother hit Jake like a physical blow. He realized that his fear wasn't really about art or college. It was about watching his son open his heart to someone who might leave, causing him the kind of pain that Jake had worked so hard to protect him from. Tommy finished packing and stood by his father's side, uncertain about what would happen next. Jake looked down at his son's anxious face and made a decision that surprised even himself. Tommy can keep staying after school, he said to Miss Collins. But I want to know exactly what you're working on, and I want him home by 5 o'clock every day. And, Miss Collins, he's still a rancher's son. Don't forget that. Tommy's face lit up with relief and joy. Really, Dad? I can keep coming. Jake nodded, though his expression remained serious. But your ranch responsibilities come first. If your grades slip or you start neglecting your chores, this arrangement ends. Understood. Yes, sir, Tommy said quickly. I promise I'll keep up with everything. As they prepared to leave, Miss Collins walked them to the door. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. I won't let you down. Jake nodded curtly and headed down the hallway with Tommy following behind. But Tommy turned back once to wave at Miss Collins, his face shining with happiness. That evening, as father and son ate dinner together, Jake found himself watching Tommy more carefully than usual. The boy was animated and talkative, sharing details about his latest art project and the techniques Miss Collins had taught him. Despite his reservations, Jake couldn't deny that this teacher had brought out a side of Tommy he hadn't seen since before his mother died. Dad, Tommy said as they cleared the dishes, I know you're worried about me getting too attached to Miss Collins. But she's not trying to take me away from the ranch. She just helps me feel good about something I'm good at. Jake paused in his dishwashing, surprised by his son's perceptiveness. Son, it's my job to protect you. Sometimes that means being careful about new situations. I know, Tommy said. But sometimes being too careful means missing out on good things too, right? Jake looked at his 12-year-old son and realized that Tommy was growing up faster than he had noticed. Maybe it was time to trust that the foundation of love and values he had tried to build was strong enough to withstand new influences and experiences. Maybe you're right, Jake admitted. Your mother always said I could be overprotective. That night, Tommy went to bed feeling grateful for both his father's love and Miss Collins's belief in him. He was beginning to understand that he didn't have to choose between his family heritage and his artistic dreams. With patience and understanding from both sides, maybe he could honor both parts of himself. The attachment he felt to Miss Collins was real and important, but it didn't diminish his love for his father or his pride in their ranch life. Instead, it had opened up new possibilities and shown him that caring adults could support different aspects of who he was becoming. As Tommy drifted off to sleep, he was already planning the drawing he would work on with Miss Collins the next week, a portrait of his father working cattle, drawn with all the new techniques she had taught him. It would be his way of showing both of them that art and ranch life could exist together in harmony. The next morning, Tommy woke up earlier than usual. He had carefully placed his sketchbook in his backpack the night before, along with his 3 best drawings of horses and cattle. His stomach felt fluttery with nervousness and excitement as he thought about showing them to Miss Collins. Jake was already gone, as expected, but he had left a note on the kitchen table next to Tommy's lunch money. Working the south pasture today. Might be late tonight. There's leftover stew in the fridge for dinner. Dad, Tommy folded the note and put it in his pocket. His father wasn't much for words, but these little notes had become their way of staying connected. At school, Tommy found himself watching the clock all morning, waiting for lunch break. Miss Collins seemed to notice his distracted behavior during math class. Tommy, would you like to come to the board and show us how to solve this word problem? She asked. The problem was about calculating how much feed would be needed for different numbers of cattle over a week. Tommy walked to the front of the classroom and picked up the chalk. Usually, being in front of the class made him nervous, but today he found himself thinking clearly about the problem. Well, he said, writing numbers on the board. If one cow eats about 30 pounds of hay per day, and we have 25 cows, That's 750 pounds per day. Over 7 days, that would be 5,250 pounds total. Excellent work, Tommy, Miss Collins said. You solved that problem like someone who really understands cattle. Have you helped your father calculate feed requirements before? Tommy nodded. Yes, ma'am. Every winter we have to figure out how much hay to buy and how to make it last until spring grass comes in. That's real-world mathematics, Miss Collins told the class. Tommy is using the same skills we're learning here to help run his family's ranch. Math isn't just numbers on a page. It's a tool we use to solve actual problems. Several students turned to look at Tommy with new interest. He'd never thought of his ranch work as being connected to school before, but Miss Collins made it seem important and valuable. When lunch finally arrived, Tommy grabbed his backpack and headed for the oak tree. Miss Collins was already there, sitting in the shade with her own lunch. She had spread a small blanket on the ground and was eating a sandwich while grading papers. I brought my drawings, Tommy said, sitting down beside her and pulling out his sketchbook. Miss Collins set down her work immediately and gave him her full attention. I've been looking forward to seeing these all morning. Tommy opened the sketchbook nervously. The first drawing showed his father on horseback, herding cattle across a wide field. Miss Collins studied it carefully, taking in every detail. The way Tommy had captured the movement of the horse, the determined expression on Jake's face, the dust clouds kicked up by the cattle's hooves. Tommy, this is remarkable, she said, and her voice carried genuine amazement. Look at how you've shown the motion here. I can almost hear the thunder of hooves and feel the dust in the air. How long have you been drawing? Since I was little, Tommy said. My mom used to draw with me before she got sick. She taught me how to really look at things, to notice the way light hits an object, or how a horse's muscles move when it runs. Miss Collins turned to the second drawing, which showed a group of cattle grazing peacefully in a meadow with mountains in the background. Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful teacher. You can see her influence in your work. The way you've captured the peaceful feeling of this scene is beautiful. The third drawing was Tommy's favorite, a detailed portrait of his father's horse, Buck, with every line of the animal's face carefully observed and recorded. This one shows incredible patience and attention to detail, Miss Collins said. You must have spent hours observing this horse to capture his personality so well. I feel like I know this animal just from looking at your drawing. Tommy felt his cheeks warming with pride. No one had ever looked at his drawings this way before. His father always said they were nice when Tommy showed them to him. But Jake was usually tired and distracted by ranch work. Miss Collins was studying each drawing like it was something important and valuable. Have you ever thought about taking art classes? Miss Collins asked. There's a community college about an hour from here that offers Saturday art programs for young people. Tommy shook his head. My dad needs me on Saturdays. That's when we do the heavy maintenance work around the ranch, fixing fences, moving equipment, stuff like that. Miss Collins nodded thoughtfully. Family responsibilities are important, but maybe there are other ways to develop your talent. Would you be interested in staying after school sometimes to work on art projects? I have some art supplies, and I used to paint quite a bit myself. You're an artist too? Tommy asked, surprised. I was an art major in college before I decided to become a teacher, Miss Collins explained. I still paint in my spare time. There's something magical about creating something beautiful with your own hands, isn't there? Tommy nodded eagerly. Sometimes when I'm drawing, I forget about everything else. It's like the whole world disappears except for what I'm trying to put on paper. That's exactly how I feel when I paint, Miss Collins said. It's like meditation, a way of really seeing and understanding the world around us. They spent the rest of lunch talking about art and techniques. Miss Collins told Tommy about different types of pencils and paper, about how artists use light and shadow to create depth, and about famous painters who had captured rural life and animals in their work. Tommy listened intently, absorbing every word. That afternoon, when the final bell rang, Tommy lingered at his desk while the other students filed out of the classroom. Would you like to stay for a while today? Miss Collins asked. I could show you some art books I have, and maybe we could work on a drawing together. Tommy nodded eagerly. He had never felt this excited about anything related to school before. Miss Collins pulled out a large book filled with reproductions of paintings by artists who had depicted rural American life. She showed Tommy works by painters who had captured the beauty of farmland, cowboys, and cattle. Some of the paintings looked almost like photographs, while others used bold colors and loose brushstrokes to create impressions of movement and emotion. Art doesn't always have to look exactly like what you're drawing, Miss Collins explained. Sometimes it's more about capturing the feeling of a moment or a place. She gave Tommy some new drawing pencils and a pad of better quality paper than he was used to. "These are yours to keep," she said. "I want you to experiment with them." Tommy spent the next hour working on a new drawing while Miss Collins prepared lessons for the next day. Occasionally, she would come over and offer gentle suggestions about technique or composition, but mostly she let him work in peaceful concentration. The drawing that emerged showed the view from their classroom window, the playground, the oak tree, and the rolling hills beyond. But Tommy had also included things that couldn't actually be seen from the window. His father working cattle in the distance, storm clouds building on the horizon, and a hawk circling overhead. It was partly realistic and partly from his imagination and memory. "This is wonderful, Tommy," Miss Collins said when he showed her the finished piece. "You've created a whole world in this drawing. It tells a story about this place and your connection to it." As Tommy packed up his new supplies, Miss Collins walked him to the classroom door. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "If it's okay with you," Tommy said. "It's more than okay. I look forward to it." The walk home seemed shorter than usual. Tommy's mind was full of new ideas and techniques he wanted to try. For the first time, he had found someone who understood his passion for art and who could help him get better at it. When he got home, the house didn't feel as empty as it usually did. Tommy made himself a snack and sat at the kitchen table, looking through his sketchbook and thinking about everything Miss Collins had shown him. He started a new drawing, this time experimenting with the techniques she had taught him about shading and perspective. Jake came home just as the sun was setting, dusty and tired as always. He hung his hat by the door and washed his hands at the kitchen sink. "How was school today, son?" he asked, the same question he asked every day. Usually, Tommy just said fine, and they moved on to other topics. But today he felt different. "Dad, we have a new teacher, Miss Collins. She's really interested in my drawings, and she knows a lot about art. She gave me some new pencils and paper, and she's going to help me get better." Jake looked at his son with surprise. It had been a long time since he'd heard Tommy sound so enthusiastic about anything related to school. "That's good, Tommy. It's nice when teachers take an interest." Jake paused, studying his son's animated expression. "You seem happy about it." "I am," Tommy said. "She makes me feel like my drawings are important, like they matter." Jake sat down at the table across from his son. He wasn't used to having long conversations, especially about feelings, but something in Tommy's voice made him pay attention. "Your drawings do matter, son. Your mother always said you had a real gift. I'm glad someone at school is helping you with it." It was the first time in months that Jake had mentioned Tommy's mother without looking sad. Tommy felt a warmth in his chest as he realized that his father supported his passion for art, even if he didn't always know how to show it. As they ate dinner together, Tommy found himself talking more than he had in weeks. He told his father about the art books Miss Collins had shown him, about the techniques he was learning, and about how different she was from their previous teachers. Jake listened quietly, nodding occasionally and asking simple questions that showed he was paying attention. By the time they finished eating, Tommy felt closer to his father than he had in a long time. That night, as Tommy lay in bed, he thought about the changes that had happened in just 2 days. He had a teacher who cared about his interests, art supplies to experiment with, and a father who seemed to understand how important this was to him. For the first time in years, Tommy was genuinely excited about going to school the next day. The morning sun painted the Texas sky orange and pink as Jake Martinez rode his horse across the wide ranch. His weathered hands gripped the reins while his eyes scanned the cattle scattered across the endless grassland. At 42 years old, Jake had spent most of his life working cattle ranches. His face showed the marks of years under the burning sun, and his body carried the strength that came from daily hard work. Behind him, in the small ranch house, his 12-year-old son Tommy was getting ready for another day at school. Tommy had his father's dark hair and serious brown eyes, but where Jake was tough and quiet, Tommy was gentle and curious about everything around him. The boy had been raised mostly by his father since his mother died when he was only 5 years old. Tommy pulled on his boots and grabbed his backpack. He could hear his father's horse outside, which meant Jake would be gone all day checking fences and moving cattle. This was their normal routine. Jake would leave before sunrise, and Tommy would walk the mile to the small country school by himself. The school was nothing special, just a one-story building with 4 classrooms that served all the ranch families in the area. Most days, Tommy didn't mind school, but he didn't love it either. The teachers were okay, but they seemed tired and didn't pay much attention to him. Tommy was a quiet student who did his work and never caused trouble. But today was different. As Tommy walked into his classroom, he saw someone new standing at the front of the room. Their regular teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a young woman with bright green eyes and shoulder-length brown hair was writing her name on the chalkboard. "Good morning, everyone," she said with a warm smile as the students filed in. "I'm Miss Sarah Collins, and I'll be your new teacher. Mrs. Henderson had to move away to take care of her sick mother, so I'll be here for the rest of the school year." Tommy slipped into his usual seat in the middle of the room and studied this new teacher. She looked different from any teacher he'd ever had. She wore a simple blue dress and had a kind face that seemed genuinely happy to be there. When she smiled, her whole face lit up, and Tommy found himself sitting up straighter in his chair. "Now, I know this is sudden," Miss Collins continued, "but I want you all to know that I'm excited to be here. I've heard wonderful things about this school and all of you students. Before we start with our lessons, why don't we go around the room, and you can tell me your names and one thing you love to do." Tommy's stomach tightened. He hated speaking in front of the class. Usually, teachers just took attendance and moved on, but this new teacher wanted them to actually talk. One by one, his classmates introduced themselves. When it was Tommy's turn, he stood up slowly. "I'm Tommy Martinez," he said quietly. "I live on my dad's ranch, and I like to draw pictures of horses and cattle." Miss Collins's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful, Tommy. I love art, and I bet your drawings are amazing. Maybe you could show me some of them sometime." Tommy nodded and sat down quickly, but he felt something strange in his chest. No teacher had ever seemed interested in his drawings before. Most of them just told students to put away anything that wasn't schoolwork. As the day went on, Tommy noticed more things about Miss Collins that were different. When Billy Watson had trouble reading aloud, she didn't make him feel bad about it. Instead, she sat next to him and helped him sound out the difficult words. When Mary Sue dropped her pencil box and all her supplies scattered across the floor, Miss Collins helped her pick everything up without making her feel clumsy. During lunch, instead of sitting in the teacher's room like Mrs. Henderson always did, Miss Collins came outside to the playground. She watched the students play and even joined in when some of the younger kids asked her to push them on the swings. Tommy usually spent lunch sitting alone under the big oak tree, eating the sandwich his father had made for him that morning. But today, Miss Collins walked over and sat down next to him in the shade. "This is a beautiful spot," she said, looking out at the rolling hills beyond the school. "You can see for miles from here. Do you eat lunch here every day?" Tommy nodded. "I like it here. It's quiet, and I can see my dad's ranch from here if I look hard enough." Miss Collins followed his gaze. "Which direction is your ranch?" Tommy pointed northwest. "About 2 miles that way. My dad raises cattle, and we have about 50 head right now. He's been working cattle his whole life, and his father before him too." "That sounds like important work," Miss Collins said. "It must take a lot of skill to take care of so many animals. What's your favorite thing about living on a ranch?" Nobody had ever asked Tommy that question before. He thought for a moment. "I like watching the baby calves learn to walk, and I like riding out with my dad sometimes when he checks the fences. The land goes on forever, and it's so quiet you can hear everything. The wind, the birds, the cattle calling to each other." Miss Collins smiled. "You describe it beautifully. It sounds like you really pay attention to the world around you. That's a gift, Tommy." The rest of the lunch period passed quickly as they talked about ranching, and Tommy found himself saying more than he usually did in an entire week. When the bell rang for afternoon classes, he almost didn't want to go back inside. The afternoon brought math and science, and Tommy discovered that Miss Collins taught differently than any teacher he'd known. Instead of just reading from textbooks, She made everything seem real and interesting. When they studied fractions, she used examples about dividing up land for grazing. When they talked about weather patterns, she asked the students about what they observed on their own farms, and ranches. Tommy found himself raising his hand to answer questions, something he rarely did with other teachers. Miss Collins always listened carefully to what he said and asked follow-up questions that made him think even deeper about the subjects. As the school day ended, Tommy gathered his books slowly. He wasn't eager to walk home to an empty house like he usually did. His father wouldn't be back until after sunset, which meant hours of being alone with just the radio for company. "Tommy," Miss Collins called as he headed for the door. "Would you mind staying for just a minute?" His heart jumped. Was he in trouble? Had he done something wrong? He walked back to her desk nervously. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she said gently, "but I notice you seem to spend a lot of time by yourself. Do you have any brothers or sisters at home?" Tommy shook his head. "No, ma'am. It's just me and my dad. My mom died when I was little." Miss Collins's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tommy. That must be hard sometimes. Does your father get home from work in time for dinner?" "Usually after dark," Tommy said. "He leaves before I wake up and comes back after I've already eaten. Ranch work keeps him busy all day." Miss Collins nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I want you to know that if you ever want to stay after school to work on homework or just to talk, you're always welcome. I usually stay for an hour or so to prepare lessons for the next day." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Not at all. In fact, I'd enjoy the company. And maybe you could show me some of those horse drawings you mentioned." For the first time in a long while, Tommy felt something that might have been excitement. "I could bring some tomorrow." "I'd love to see them," Miss Collins said. "Now, you'd better head home before it gets too late. I'll see you tomorrow morning." As Tommy walked home along the dusty road, he found himself thinking about Miss Collins. She was different from any adult he'd known besides his father. She seemed to actually care about what he thought and felt. She asked questions like she really wanted to know the answers, not just because she had to. When he got home, the house felt especially quiet. Tommy made himself a peanut butter sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, thinking about the day. He pulled out his notebook and started sketching the scene from lunch. Miss Collins sitting under the oak tree with the rolling hills in the background. As he drew, he realized he was looking forward to tomorrow in a way he hadn't felt about school in years. Outside, the sun was setting over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Soon his father would come home, tired and dusty from his day's work. They would eat dinner together, maybe watch a little television, and then go to bed. It was the same routine they'd followed for years. But somehow, today felt like the beginning of something different. Tommy couldn't quite put his finger on what it was, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like someone at school actually saw him, not just as another student to teach, but as a person worth knowing. That feeling stayed with him as he finished his drawing and waited for his father to come home.